labor costing as part of our discussion, and before that we have discussed material costing and what do we need to do with regarding valuation, and how do you measure the cost of material, and how can you minimize resource consumption or application of your cash related to material, and that also helped us in saving money, and how to reduce the burden on profits. In labor costing, we'll be first of all discussing the different types of labor we have. Just like in material we understood that we have direct material and indirect material. Similarly, we have direct labor and indirect labor as well. After that, we'll be learning how to measure the cost of labor related to both direct and indirect labor. And in that, we'll be discussing different components of the compensation, like basic salary, overtime pay, overtime premium, bonuses, etc. Okay, and then we'll be learning how to classify it. Okay, yes. Okay, well, let's start our discussion on labor costing. Just like direct and indirect material, we have direct labor and indirect labor. Okay. Direct labor is labor that is directly involved in production process, whereas indirect labor is labor that is not directly connected with production process. The ones who are on the production floor, the ones who are actually converting raw material into finished goods, or they are part of any process that involves conversion of goods, that is direct labor. Whereas all the other labor that manages, like accounts department, administration department, even the supervisor himself does not form part of the direct labor because he's just supervising. He's not involved directly. He's not converting anything with his hands from raw material to finished goods. All such kind of labor will be indirect labor. Okay, and costing, or when we measure the cost that we have incurred on direct labor, it will be labeled and represented as direct labor cost, whereas all the costs related to indirect labor will be treated as overheads. Just like in case of indirect material, it's not added up as direct material cost. Okay, it will be treated as overheads. So something like this, that we have direct material, which we have studied, and then direct labor, which we'll be studying in these next few lectures, and then we have overheads, and overheads include both indirect material and indirect labor. Alright, now how will be differentiating, or what is included in indirect labor, or when we have confusion that if whether a certain cost is direct labor cost or indirect labor cost, or what are the rules in order to identify the difference between these two. We'll be learning that in our next few lectures. Okay, in this lecture, in this chapter related to labor, we'll be learning how to calculate gross pay of labor, both direct and indirect. And in that, we'll be learning how to calculate your basic pay. We'll also be learning how to calculate your overtime, and we'll also be learning how to calculate bonus, because all three, when you sum all these three up, you get gross pay. And it is your gross pay on which you calculate all the tax rates, participation funds rate, and everything is applied on this gross pay. Okay, and all kinds of deductions that you have to make. This is all done after you have calculated this gross pay. Okay, let's understand these things one by one and how to calculate them. Talking about basic pay, this is what is the promised compensation. This is what the employee will be getting, irrespective of other conditions or changes in circumstances or the time he has spent or whatever. Okay, this is the promised salary or wage he will be getting, irrespective of the time he has spent more on production or he has worked extra. This is the minimum compensation he will be receiving for sure. Okay, now this basic pay can be calculated in two ways. It can either be time-based, or it can either be output-based. If your compensation is time-based, then it will be calculated on the basis of number of hours, number of weeks, number of months you have worked. Okay, and in that, how much time you have spent actually producing something. Most of the time it is not taken care of, but yes, we do have techniques. We can calculate that as well, that we can calculate the effective time to calculate your compensation, but again it will be time based. However, if your compensation is output based, then your salary or wage will be determined by the number of units produced by you. The more you produce, the more compensation you will get. The lesser you produce, lesser your compensation total will be. Okay, we also call it piecemeal wages. Okay, that is another name of the same basis of calculating piecemeal or piecework. Now in that, there are a lot of other things that we need to discuss, and it's not as simple as that. Like when we are calculating the basic pay, the first thing that comes to mind that, okay, what about the time that we are paying for, but he's not actually working for that time, which we call as idle time? How do we treat that? How are we going to make calculations regarding that period of time for which he was sitting idle doing nothing? And then the next question pops up, whether it is a direct cost or an indirect cost. Even if we are paying it to a direct labor, then should it be treated as an overhead or production? Because if he is not working, then that amount of time is not applied for production. So one school of thought says that it shouldn't be made part of production cost, it should be treated as an overhead, and that's what we will be learning in more detail afterwards.